So what is a policy? Policy refers to public policy as opposed to private policy. Innumerable definitions in innumerable books. Ultimately is pointing to an action or lack of action of the government with the results and consequences pertaining to a large part of the society. So it's about a measure which impacts lives of hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of people. In terms of aims of policy, a policy could address a challenge or mitigate a hardship. And in this case, obviously, because it is reacting to an existing challenge, it is often referred to as reactive policy. Or a policy could promote a common good or a worthy result, for example, education for all. And in this case, it's kind of because it's looking into the future, it's looking for a positive outcome, a new outcome. It's often referred to as proactive policy. Who has the responsibility for making a policy? Since we're talking about public policy, the responsibility for policy making obviously lies with the government. But while the responsibility lies with the government, the inspiration and the idea for policy does not necessarily originate from the government. It can come from multiple sources. Take, for example, the right to information movement in India. The inspiration came from Mrs. Aruna Bankar. In fact, in today's times, given the proliferation of social media and how connected we are, how voices can be amplified from one corner of the country and one part of the globe to the rest of it, the list of the policy influencers and the inspirers has really become longer. So how are the policies made? Generally speaking, policy making consists of 7 distinct and sometimes overlapping phases. The first is the problem or the opportunity recognition. This is about recognizing that this particular issue in the society needs a policy response. Now, this opportunity or the challenge can often be recognized or identified through public opinion, which gets reflected in, say, various channels of media, or through government's priorities. Needless to say that it is possible to influence public opinion through various communication and advocacy. The second is the agenda setting. Here it is all about what the policy is trying to achieve. What will be the end result of the policy? So that's the agenda setting. The next is the policy formulation phase. This is now the starting of the complexity and the enormity of the task of policy making. Formulating a policy means that you have to bring to the fore range of evidence, range of analysis, opinions to the fore, and you have to sew them together into practical, actionable steps. These should be sufficiently detailed to serve as guideline but not to stifle innovation down the stream. So the policy formulation is something where you start seeing a larger role of engagement of different stakeholders, different sorts of experts, different knowledge hubs, so that these all can be leveraged and a sensible, practical, feasible, actionable policy formulation can be arrived at. The next is the policy adoption. So after the policy has been written up, and this policy could be very detailed, and depending upon which ministry or which country or which year we are talking about, or it could be a skeletal policy note. Whatever it is, ultimately the policy has to have the stamp of approval from the highest executive power of that country. So in many countries, national policies are approved by the cabinet. Sometimes policies get approved by the legislative arm of the government or or the parliament. So that's agreeing, that's a national consensus, and the consensus in this case is obviously represented by the government to say that this is the agreed action plan, this is the agreed agenda, this is what we are going to do now. After this comes the budgeting. Now, the commitment of adequate resources to a policy cannot be overstated, because without adequate resourcing, a policy remains a mere wish. And I have worked in countries which have signed up to absolutely most progressive international conventions and have also reflected that in national strategies and plans, but were not able to implement them because they were never able to resource it, or they did not show enough commitment to put budget behind these plans and these policy measures. The next phase is about policy implementation. This is where the rubber hits the road, right? And this, in many ways, people fail to recognize that this is actually also the design phase, because lessons from the implementation really tell us about how good or bad the policy is. In fact, I talk about this, the challenges of implementation, and how implementation is actually a very important part of the policy design process in my recent book on social protection called Lance of Blossoming Hope. The last phase is that of the evaluation, and this is where one assesses the impact of the policies, and the lessons are fed back into the policy process, sometimes going back right at the beginning of even, was it the right agenda? Was it right formulation? Was it the right budget? Was the implementation architecture correct? So these are 7 different phases of policy making.